if you have an idea on front end, you know that web page we need CSS, JS. How do we organize the CSS and JS in AEM? Welcome to today's Adobe Experience Manager in Action with me, Veena. For any website, the front end is rendered using HTML and they will have an associated CSS and JS. All those CSS and JS get included as tags in the header or in the footer part. Let's assume that there is a huge website and there is a lot of CSS and JS getting included one after the other in the page. So we will end up having like a lot of CSS or JS include, which on a bigger scale will be very difficult to manage. What AEM has brought in is something called client library. It is a more modular approach of organizing your CSS and JS. So what they have is a folder called client library. So the primary type of the folder is called client library, and in that client library you can have a lot of like n number of CSS files. Doesn't matter how many files you are referring from one client library, but the thing what matters is even if you have 10 file, what file you want to actually use and in what order, that's what you mention in that particular client library. So the way you mention the order of the file, it will pick those files, it will combine that all that CSS or JS files into a single CSS or a single JS file and add it to your website. So that way you have more structured control on your client library. So let's say you have a separate CSS for your header, or you have a separate CSS for your footer, you have a separate CSS for your top nav. That's not the ideal case, but just for the sake of this I'm saying. So let's say you have 10 different CSS, and for bringing this entire page you might have to put those 10 CSS included onto your HTML, right? So as a normal front-end developer, what you will do, if you have a JS file you want to you will include a script tag, and if you have like 10 CSS or 10 JS, you will have 10 lines of link tag and 10 lines of script tag. Using client library, we can get rid of all that. We can make in all the CSS into one single client library, and depending on the size of your project and the requirements of your project, maybe you can have more than one client library. That doesn't matter, but the entire point is the client library gives a more organized way of handling your CSS and JS for a very huge complex project. Said that, what I want to concentrate in this video is the difference between embed and dependency. When we create client libraries, we give a category, or we will add this client library to a particular category. That might be a new category or an existing category. Now let's say you have X category of client library. In that you have like 10 JS files. Okay, now you have a Y category of client library in which you have another 4 JS files. Now this X category file should be executed only after you execute the Y category of files. Okay, in that scenario you will embed the Y category into the X category, which result in a single CSS file, both Y and X combined into one file. Okay, now let's say you have an X category and you have a Z category. In the Z category you have 2 files, let's say the jQuery files. Now for X category, the Z category is always a dependency. Like without Z category, X category cannot execute, right? If any JS should, so if you don't include the basic jQuery, your JS will not execute. So let's say your set category has jQuery related files. So your set category, so your X depends on set. So what you do, you will add said category as the dependency of your X category client library. Now what happens when you run the X category client library, or when you run your website, your set category dependency will get included plus your X. So there will be two client library included, or two tags in the final HTML. One will be to your dependency and one will be to your category. Now we will see this in action. So this is how that embedding and dependency differentiate. Basically we will see that in action now. So what I am going to do is, so I always like to work with the weekend project. They have provided, Adobe has provided a very beautiful tutorial. So whoever is really new to AEM can always go and work with that tutorial. It is very basic. It starts from scratch and it tells you everything how you want to develop an AEM project. So I always work with that when I work on any tutorial or things like that, because it has everything, right? So now what I'm going to do is, I already have that weekend project installed in my local server. So there are a lot of client libraries. Okay, so what I'm going to do is, I'm going to create a client library. So you have to create a client library folder, and then I will give it a name. So there is no basic naming convention or anything for client libraries. The only thing is, it should be of type CQ client library, and if your project is following a particular structure or naming convention, follow that throughout. So for client libraries here in this project, they are actually following something like client lib and then hyphen and then some unique name. So I'm just going to give some unique name for this particular client library, and I will save it. Now what we have to do is, once that is done, see, every client library will have a CSS txt and js txt. What is the purpose of these files? These are the files in which we will list out that, okay, these are the list of CSS what I want to use, or these are the list of JS I want to use. So we will just I'll just copy and paste those here. Okay, now what I'm going to do is, I have created a client library, and then I have added a folder called CSS to have all my CSS files inside this. You can have n number of CSS files in it, doesn't matter. You can just differentiate all your CSS according to what they do, and then what pay, or you, if you are a front-end guy, you know how to work with that. So all your CSS files will go into that folder, and I don't have anything in JS right now for this, so just we will work around with CSS. It will give me a little more control on what I am doing, right? So in the CSS file, this is the format in which you have to mention the CSS file. So hash base will say from which folder you want to refer your CSS. So if it is from the CSS folder, just say base equal to CSS, and then in the order you want to include the files, mention the file name. So I have only one file, it says sample.css, so I have mentioned that here. So we have to give a category name. So you can just say categories, and then you see, if you want to create a new category, give that name, or if you want to add it to any existing category, give that name. Okay, so what I'm going to do is, I will just add a new category. I will give a new categories, and then we can just say ND content, and categories is always a multi-field, so just add it, and and okay, now we have added it. Now we take this category, and we will add that. Okay, we will just copy and just paste this here so that we don't have to. And here what I will do is I will just say content. Okay, now whatever client library which we created, now we are going to include that into our project. Now let's go and see what is happening in our project. So let's go and do a view page source. Now if you do a view page source, so you can see that your client library is getting included. Now let's go to the client library, open the sample.css file, and we will add some styles to this file. Font size and 28 pixels. See, and okay, now what we have to do is, here you can see, right, /apps. Let's get rid of that. So what I will do, I'll go here and I'll say allowProxy and boolean and true. Oh, not a multi-value. So it's not a multi-value, so you have to make sure you are not adding it as a multi-value. You just refresh it and your view page source should change now. Okay, now we are all set. Now we will add first dependency and then embed and see what happens. Okay, dependency. Oh, right. So for that we have to create a dependent client library, right? Let's copy this and let's paste it here. And what we are going to do is, so when you copy and paste it, it just creates something like copy of. Just rename it to something like content 1. Okay, we don't need a meaningful name for this video purpose, so I'll just call it as content 1, and then we can go back and just give them the category as content 1. Okay, now when I do that, and then here you say h2 is font size 25, something of that sort. Okay, now what we'll do is we'll go back here, add dependencies of type string, and add your dependency category name multi and add. So while adding, click add. While adding, make sure your dependency folder category is right and save it. Go back to your project, do a hard refresh, and then go to your view source and see it. Sure that your naming is correct. You can see that I was giving a wrong, like there was a typo in my category name, and that's why my category was not reflecting. So now I have corrected that typo, and if you go back and now see, you come here and refresh and see, you can see that, see, the content 1 and content got added. Let's remove this. Okay, now we will add embed string and then whatever our category. So just make sure there is no typo, say okay, and you go back to your project, refresh it, and then refresh your view source, and you can see that your client, that 2 client CSS is not there. Now there is only one. Open that and you can see both have been combined together into one single file. So that is the basic logic of having dependency and embedding. So if you have 4 different client libs and you want to make all that 4 into a single CSS file into your HTML, use embed. And if you want to run, like mostly this happens in the case of your JS, like if you want to run a particular client library and there is another client library which which is a kind of dependency for this client library. Make sure add it as a dependency so that that client library get included first and executes, and then your client library gets included and executed. So you got the basic difference, right? When you do a dependency, those client libraries get added to your HTML separately. Dependency will get added first and it will execute first, and then your client library. When you do an embedding, whatever categories you are embedding, all of them will get combined to a one single client library, and you will have only one include of the link tag, but that one file will have all your CSS or JS. So that's the basic difference between dependency and embed. I have used very simple CSS files. This won't be the exact scenario in your project. This I have used only for your understanding. Hope this makes sense to you. If you have any questions, do let me know. Thank you.